Good morning and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me, Sangha, and my fantastic co-host, Morten. Today we have Mark Brown, CEO of Psybersafe, with us. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Cybersecurity, being safe on the internet, protecting people's data, it's a huge thing in social care. I know that you're not working within the space of social care, but tell us a bit about what you do with regards to being cyber safe.
Sure. Cybersafe, our company, we provide online training based on behavioural science. And so really what we focus on is the individual, the human, and how we can help them be a little bit more safe and secure in their daily lives, and therefore by extension within their organization, wherever that might be. We actually came about because my previous career was within a bank, and clients were asking the bank, help, what do we do? You know cybersecurity, you're a bank, you must know what's going on. And so we spent some time looking at this, and I was lucky to be able to go into a little innovation bubble within the organization to really try and understand what we could do to help clients. And after quite a bit of research, we focused on cybersecurity training because by and large, what was being offered out there was frankly rubbish. We thought we might find something that could help our clients and ourselves, but we couldn't. And so we decided to build it ourselves. And great for me because I have a background in psychology, so we really could start to apply psychology research on cybersecurity behavior. And you can imagine there's quite a bit of behavioral research within the policy and within the medical space around obesity and alcoholism and eating properly and exercising and all those wonderful things. And a lot of that research sitting there, to me, begging to be applied to cybersecurity, because from a human perspective, it's all about what we do.
Exactly. So how has your journey been since, the bubble, innovation bubble, and then starting your business and getting into the whole commercialization aspect?
Well, it was an interesting one. So within the bank that I worked for, so you can imagine there are large corporations that suddenly think, oh, innovation is the thing. So they create these great opportunities to develop new ideas and whatnot. So we did that. We developed the precursor to Cybersafe. It's a series of very short 5-minute episodes that people get month by month. And this is all behaviorally based, which I can explain a bit later on. So it's a program of learning, and we sold it to a handful of clients of the bank. We sold it to the bank itself because, of course, the bank as well was using sort of the tired old, watch this video once a year or maybe twice a year. Then I'm going to ask you some questions, which you won't be able to answer because you haven't been paying attention, because most people find cybersecurity boring. But then you have to answer these questions. You can't do it. You have to do the whole thing again, by which time you're irritated, you're annoyed, you've missed your train home, and nothing sticks and nothing changes. The only benefit is for compliance, who can say, look, everybody's done our training, but nothing actually changes. So that met with a lot of positive response from the people we were talking to and clients we obviously sold it to. But the bank then decided that actually they were a bank and they weren't a cybersecurity outfit. That and budget changes and internal changes, they decided that they no longer wanted to pursue this. So I said, that's great, I'm off. So I left that and set up Cybersafe in October 2019. Of course, we had a couple of years of learning and research under our belt. So it's a bit like, for the older among us, the $6 million man, we can rebuild it better, stronger, faster. So it gave us a blank slate to rebuild and recode and redo everything to create Cybersafe, which was not bad at the end of 2019. It was just pre-COVID. So we thought, well, we've got time to build, and the first 6 months were nice and quiet because the whole world seemed to stop for a while. But then one of the previous contacts came calling and said, hey, are you still doing this stuff? And so our first major client was another European bank, who, by the way, is still a client. So that was great because that again provided the validation that we were on the right track, especially because now it was just a couple of us sort of working in a back room somewhere. And that was during COVID. So that was the first year of COVID. Then we had a little wobble towards the end because I got COVID around Christmas 2020 and actually got it pretty bad. Ambulance to hospital, 6 weeks in hospital, and so on and so forth. So that slowed us down by a couple of months. But anyway, all is well. Now we are at 10 clients and still growing and developing and building out more and more episodes and interesting ideas and what have you. So right now it's going well.
Fantastic. Explain us a bit more behavioral side of this whole cybersecurity aspect, because that's not what is often taught or thought about, but we kind of know that it's our micro actions which all eventually then can become one big attack at some point. So explain us a little bit more how you're doing it very differently and very innovatively.
Yes, well, I'd love to. It's interesting that actually behavior science is getting more and more publicity these days, which is a great thing. But the actual application is, frankly, a slightly different kettle of fish. But there are a number of things that we will all recognize that we've built into the Cybersafe program, or why it looks the way it does. I mean, for example, we start off with episodes that are on average about 5 minutes long, never more than 10 minutes. Why? Because the adult attention span is about 10 minutes. After that, it starts to wane. And we've known this for a long time. This research has existed for a long time. And you can see it. I mean, this is why students, for example, might use flashcards to learn. So it's a little bit very often. It's far more effective than sitting with a pile of books over a weekend and hoping to retain this for longer than a couple of days, if that. So a little and often clearly makes sense. It gives us a couple of advantages. Because we're talking about behavior, that's not a one-shot thing. Behavior takes time to change, to embed. Habits are almost hardwired in our brains after a while, and older habits are far more sticky than new habits. And with a lot of cybersecurity behavior, it's actually bad habits that we need to break and therefore actually replace with new habits, and that takes time. There's a well-known behavioral scientist called Katie Milkman, and I'll borrow her phrase, that sustained behavior change requires sustained intervention, which is why we talk about month by month by month, and ideally over a period of years, because again, cybersecurity is not at the forefront of most people's minds. So if you stop, it'll fade. So certain topics will come back in a different way, in a different form over the months, to really start embedding that notion that, hey, cybersecurity is a thing to take serious, and this is what you can practically actually do in order to do that. And then you create sort of a cyber hygiene, because, for example, getting used to writing longer, stronger passwords every time you do it is a little bit of a trigger to say, hey, cybersecurity is important. So you go from longer, stronger passwords to password managers to then actually understanding that that little bit of effort is useful to be that little bit safer. And then you might move on to using two-factor or multi-factor authentication. And then you might start thinking about how you're sending data to your clients or treating your data. So all these things can build on themselves if you structure these, the learnings, the triggers, if you like, if you structure them well. One thing I said there is getting people to make that little bit of effort. The big issue with people adopting habits or changing behaviors is exactly that, it's effort. Why should I bother to do something extra? Fundamentally, as humans, we're lazy and our brains are lazy. And our brain, much like us, would far rather not make the effort if it doesn't have to.
Mm.
And there are a number of biases and heuristics that demonstrate that indeed we'd rather do something different. So the shortcuts that we have, the heuristics, are a prime example. We get so much. Sorry, Morten.
No, I was just going to say, to make that real for people also, because obviously I'm just Morten, I'm just recording this episode now, but understanding what's going on from where I am today to relating this to just the word cyber. It's got nothing to do with me, I would think, but I know that it's got, but to break that down into what I've understand is bite-sized learning of some sort and maintaining that and developing that over time. What are then some good examples of the content that could be relevant also for social care providers, people that work in social care, live? Are there any of your typical topics you would think would be relevant for them as well?
Funnily enough, pretty much everything we do is relevant right across the board. From a marketing perspective, it's a nightmare because it applies to everybody. But I'll give you some examples. And let's take a very simple thing, passwords. We deal with them every day. We have to enter them in all kinds of systems, unless you're particularly advanced in your IT infrastructure. And they're often a pain. And then you have to redo them every now and then. So what does that do? That creates a pattern whereby you think, oh, okay, well, I'm going to create a password of a certain structure. The most used one is still password and number 1. And then when you have to change it, it becomes password 2. It becomes password 3. Funnily enough, passwords are one of the most often attacked areas exactly for that reason. So if you have a simple password like password 1, or it might be something else, that's relatively short and simple, name, personal details, what have you, it's very easy to break as a hacker. We call it a brute force attack. You just keep trying until you get through. And because so many people use the same password in different accounts, if I have one, I'll use your name and use that password in any other social media and so on and so forth, just to see if I can get in. So that's a very simple vulnerability that if you make it slightly more difficult, then I'll go somewhere else because there'll be an easier victim somewhere else. Don't be the slowest one in the pack if you're being chased by wolves. It's as simple as that. So make that password that little bit stronger. Add a symbol, add a number, and immediately you are more secure. But that requires a little bit of thought. And often, therefore, people can go, oh, yeah, no, it'll be fine.
What's another good example? I'm thinking people in our sector will receive a lot of emails, and the characteristics of those often, or sometimes at least, being dubious.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a same sort of notion. If you think about it, your email box is typically flooded with a whole load of stuff. You probably have more than one email address. And you get a lot of spam, and you get emails from accounts you've opened and so on and so forth. So that's become very normal. It's actually invading right into your living room, right into the screen of your laptop. But we take that as given. If I were to walk into your house and say, hi, you don't really know me, but, you call the police, you'd throw me out. So first of all, it's normal that you receive emails from strangers. Then, often, certainly phishing emails, dodgy emails, will focus on urgency, or something that's too good to be true, or something from something in authority. Now, a typical one might be like, and I've seen these, saying that, hey, you've either missed a payment, or your account's going to be closed because you're the suspicious activity on it. Click here to verify that it's you. What that does is it creates a stress response. And that goes back to sort of when we were running around in the jungles 10,000 years ago. It starts playing on our amygdala, which is a little walnut-shaped area in the center of our brain, which is responsible for our flight or fight response. Fight, flight, or freeze response. And what it actually does, because it also controls information flow, it effectively shuts off your prefrontal cortex, which is your executive function. That's the bit that actually evaluates and thinks and decides what you do on a day-to-day basis. It's the clever part of our brain. But because it still reacts and gives a stress response, you get adrenaline flowing through your body, it actually says, stop, I need to deal with this threat of having to pay something, or losing my account, or getting that parcel that supposedly wasn't delivered. All these things create a response that means that you don't actually look as carefully at that email as you otherwise would. And your immediate reaction is, how do I get rid of this threat? Now, it's by no means life-threatening, but the brain response is exactly the same. So you don't look at the fact that it comes from a very strange email address, or that it says, hello, dear customer, as opposed to hello, Morten, or hello, Sangha, or there's a spelling mistake in there. And so you lose those signals and you go, oh, I need to solve this threat. I will click on that link because that's easy. And that's when we end up in trouble. And you see that a lot in phishing mails, that it's always around urgency or threat that you're about to lose something, or curiosity, for example. And curiosity can be very powerful as well. And therefore, phishing as an attack vector is very difficult. And within large organizations, we do a lot of training. We send people phishing simulations to get them to get used to the notion that these things do come through. But the biggest problem is, A, we need to focus on people's minds and what's going on in there. And the other thing is, context is so very important. So if I send you a mail about something that you happen to be looking at earlier today, suddenly that becomes even more acceptable. So it is a tricky thing, and we need to train people to recognize that this happens a lot, and also to basically stop and think, to stop that stress response from taking over. And then again, that takes time. Phishing, by the way, is still the most used method of attacking organizations and people, because it's so cheap to implement. You can hire hackers as a service to actually put it all in place for you. And, if you send out 10,000 emails, somebody will click. You make your money, you're unlikely to get caught. So it's, the risk-reward equation is stacked against us, because a hacker can just chuck it out there and he'll sit behind a whole bunch of servers in another country somewhere. And it's very, very unlikely to get caught.
I totally now understand why you do cybersecurity training rooted in human psychology, because of the way you're explaining it. It makes great sense.
Yeah.
I think phishing, I don't know if people would know this is the term for it, but phishing and obviously passwords are some of the more mundane, I guess, examples you can bring. What's the massive one? What's the big one? What's the one we don't know?
Well, this happens. There's an awful lot we don't know because nobody wants to talk about it. Because if it happens to me as an organization, that's my reputation on the line. Unfortunately for small organizations, this will kill most of them. What we don't know, well, I tell you, let me give you another example. So social engineering is something that most people probably won't be familiar with. It's exactly that. It's engineering a social situation in which I can trick you to do stuff. And there are almost unbelievable examples of people being called up and convinced that they're talking to the very, very senior person in their organization, and then moving significant amounts of money to other accounts and basically losing it. There's one account in Europe, for example, where somebody was called up who, within a finance function, and it doesn't take a lot of scraping on Facebook or LinkedIn to find somebody who works within a finance function. And they managed to convince them that they were the CEO of the parent organization in another country. This person actually talked to her bosses locally, and they all thought it was a bit odd, but seemed legitimate. Over a period of, I think, 10 months or something like that, they moved hundreds of thousands of euros a month to a particular account for supposed acquisitions that were meant to be happening somewhere. Until somebody somewhere said, hey, what's going on? 17 million is what they lost. Because people were so convinced that this was right. And once you've done it once, the second time is easier and the third time is easier. See, and part of that, again, comes into that psychology of, generally as people, we want to please people. We want to be helpful. And if something is convincing enough, we can convince ourselves that this makes sense and this is the right thing to do. That's one example that reached, if you like, the outside world. But these things happen all the time.
And I kind of can connect with that, but in a much more smaller way, because last year my team was flooded with an email masked under my email ID saying that deposit $100 of Amazon voucher now because we need to buy that immediately for whatever. And I had much more younger team then, and obviously they got completely confused, and obviously they had the sense to call me and check, and I'm saying, what request, what Amazon voucher, and why would I even ask you to do that, and so we had to then again make a complaint to relevant people. We had to tighten our email security. We had to send them again details that please call when in doubt, don't take an action. So yeah, this is happening even in smaller, I'd say, businesses as well.
Yeah, it's a very important thing you mentioned there. Please call when in doubt. It's okay to question. And this, again, is almost a cultural thing in companies, small companies, is to stop and check and question. And that should be encouraged. It's the same, again, with the fake emails. Report them. If you report them, then somebody can do something about it. But sometimes people feel silly for reporting the wrong thing, and so on and so forth. And that really shouldn't be the case. I mean, we should all be encouraging people to flag everything. What we see a lot in larger organizations who are a bit more sophisticated is that they will scrape and filter emails before they even come to the employees. You get a different issue there. Then people don't see what's going on and feel perfectly secure. And you get that attitude of, I'm in the office, it's not my problem, IT's got to sort it out, which is so fundamentally wrong because ultimately it's everybody's responsibility,
That makes great sense.
Fantastic.
We've got some interesting stuff this year. We're asking everybody what their predictions are for 2023 within their field of expertise. Do you have a prediction then for 23?
Well, you may have seen the latest thing, AI coming out, Chat GPT. I think that's going to get a lot of press, in part because it'll make it a lot easier to create plausible stories and what have you for a human perspective. But there are already people fighting Chat GPT. There's another thing out there you may have seen called Chat Zero. There's a chap who's built something to actually be able to tell whether something is done by AI. In the online world, it's going to become even more of almost a fight out there between that sort of technology and catching that sort of technology, and therefore between the goodies and the baddies. Because it's a lot more easy to convince people or to use technology to make it seem as if you're legitimate. It used to be here. Let me give you another one just quickly. For example, it used to be quite difficult to create a deep fake. So me sitting online talking to you via a video call, and it looks like me. That used to be technically very, very difficult to fake it. That's getting more and more easy. It only takes one or two photographs, and they can make you seem like me.
There are deep fake apps on all phones out there, downloadable from the most common stores that you can use.
Yeah.
And yes, I saw the Chat GPT. What they're claiming is that you can't make it anywhere near anything that's offendable to anyone, but obviously scammers and also just people who are wanting to test the AI and the engine there are using it to say, well, now pretend you're a character that does this, and then you're actually able to trigger it to do stuff that the algorithm wasn't supposed to do. And obviously it's going to refine the scamming that we're going to receive as individuals and organizations, because you can obviously say in the best English or in Oxford English this email, so we won't be able to detect those typos and that you mentioned before, because they're now perfect as emails.
It'll just become even more difficult.
And that's the thing with technology, isn't it? There is the good side, and then obviously there is also the bad side, and that's where I find Mark's work fascinating. How do you bring that learning behaviorally so that you know the good from the bad and take action? One more question that was asked by our previous guest, and he didn't know that we are talking to you. Like you wouldn't know who we are going to talk next, and we would request you to leave a question for our next guest as well. So our previous guest asked, if you were to be requested to install a camera in your bathroom for prevention of falls, would you do that?
Not right now, because I'm not at risk. If I were a little bit older and perhaps infirm, then I'd have no problem with that. But I'd want to know who else is there, and being a cybersecurity guy, I'd want to know how those signals go from A to B. And you can still install them such that, if you're worried about privacy, that it's not really going to invade. You could, for example, I would probably put it a foot up from the floor so that it can monitor the floor up to my knees. And, you can still wander around and, I don't know, do whatever you do in a bathroom. So I think that's actually not a bad idea.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'll use that myself.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So what's your question for our next guest, Mark?
So my question would be, slight bit of background. The interesting thing is, between making training mandatory and voluntary, sounds simple, but it has serious ramifications. Because again, if something's voluntary, you have a choice. If you're busy, well, I'll do this later or whatever. We spend a lot of time making our training interesting in order to ensure that voluntary stays along the line. And we're reasonably good with that, but it's never as good as mandatory. But of course, if you have something mandatory to do, okay, I'll do it because I have to. What do you think you could do to make voluntary training, and I'd want a specific answer, to make voluntary training almost or as good as mandatory training in terms of people carrying on with it?
That's a good.
It's also a difficult one because, we do all kinds of stuff and,
Well, to begin with, my simple answer would be to ask Mark at Cybersafe how to do that. But yeah, I'm sure I'll reply. Thank you for today. It's been really, really interesting hearing about a topic that's sometimes identified as being a bit dull. I think this is relatable and it's relevant for everyone that works in social care. It's definitely relevant to their employers. So thank you for today, Mark.
No, thank you. It was interesting for me. I look forward to the next one.
Thank you very much, Mark. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, review, and share your favorite Take Care podcast with your friends and colleagues. Until we meet next week, take care.